Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 96, Snack Attack. The episode begins with Ash and the gang not just on their way to one island this time, but an entire group of 7 islands. That's right, 7 islands. Tracy informs Ash and the gang as they come to the islands in the distance that these islands were known as the 7 Grapefruit Islands because they were known for their massive grapefruits. Ash and the gang go and decide to check these out, and Jigglypuff follows them. They see a grapefruit tree immediately after they dock on the beach, and they are in fact huge-ass grapefruits. And they're all very impressed by this, and Ash goes to pick one, believing that no one would try to stop him, but unfortunately, a woman then comes up and starts trying to beat him with a stick, which he's only able to block with his backpack. The woman accuses him of trying to steal the grapefruit, and Ash is like, well, I'm sorry, bro, I didn't know that this counted as stealing. I thought that no one else was on this island. The woman believes Ash, and proceeds to apologize to him for trying to beat him with a goddamn stick, and decides to explain to them what makes the grapefruit so big in the first place. But not before explaining that the reason why she was so insistent on Ash being a grapefruit thief was because there was in fact a grapefruit thief that was going around and causing a lot of the grapefruit to go missing, and they were trying to find it. How do they know it's a thief though? Like, who knows, maybe the grapefruit was just like blown off the tree by wind or something, who knows. But anyways, as Pikachu played with one of the gigantic grapefruit, the woman went on with her explanation of how they were grown. Essentially, they wrapped them with straw during the winter to make sure they didn't die, and then when the summer came around, they would have all the tropical butterfree pollinate them, and the butterfree's pollination causes them to grow big. Just then, a man arrives and panically informs the woman, whose name was Ruby, that more grapefruits had been stolen, and this leads Ruby and Ash and the gang, who wanted to help out with the situation, to follow the man to the scene of the crime, where they see that not only has fruit been stolen, but the trees have been destroyed in the process as well. Ash and the gang wonder what could have possibly wanted to eat trees for some reason, and the man then calls them over, having spotted the culprit. It was none other than a Snorlax. That explained why the trees were eaten, because Snorlax would eat anything. As the Snorlax just sits there eating mounds and mounds of the huge grapefruits, Ash takes the opportunity to use his Pokedex on it, even though he's already met a Snorlax before, and it basically just says, yeah, Snorlax is a fat bitch who will eat anything in its path. 3 more men then come up and try to help with moving the Snorlax, but that obviously doesn't work due to its weight. Knowing that they now couldn't do anything to actually stop the Snorlax, Ruby decides that the best thing that they could do was protect the grapefruit from being eaten by picking it all. The island residents begin to pick, but they're not going fast enough on their own, so Ash gets the idea to send out his Bulbasaur, and Misty gets the idea to send out her Staryu, and they help, with Bulbasaur using its Razor Leaf and Vine Whip, and Staryu using its Swift. Pikachu also helps as well, although it doesn't do much, as it just simply carries some grapefruits. This results in a large stockpile of grapefruit being formed on the ground. And this actually just ends up backfiring for Ash and the gang, as now the Snorlax just sees all of the grapefruit gathered in one place and proceeds to scarf it down in an instant. Maybe you should have tried to weaken the Snorlax first, or come up with a distraction for it so that you could haul all of the grapefruit away first, but they didn't do that, and only think to weaken the Snorlax to stop it from eating now, when that's what they should have done from the beginning. But Ash sends out his Bulbasaur to try and weaken the Snorlax, but its small-ass vines are nothing for its fat-ass body, and the Snorlax proceeds to just use its Body Slam and slam Bulbasaur down to the ground, knocking it out. With Ash's failure, the Snorlax was not defeated whatsoever, and despite just eating an entire pile of grapefruit, it's still fucking hungry, so it goes off to another area with more grapefruit trees, and proceeds to eat them as well. It continues to do this, with no one stopping it, until the entire first of the 7 grapefruit islands now has no grapefruit on it. Despite this kind of relieves Ash and the gang, as now that means that Snorlax couldn't eat any more grapefruit, and now all they had to do was just stop it so that they can regrow the grapefruit and it wouldn't be able to eat it again. However, the Snorlax then walks into the water and proceeds to swim to the second island. So, not only could the Snorlax swim somehow, but now it would be able to go to all the other islands and fully destroy all of the grapefruit. Ash and the gang are confused by the fact that a Snorlax of all Pokemon could swim, especially with it being so lazy. But Ruby rebuttals, how else do you think Snorlax got to a goddamn tropical island? Ruby proceeds to get into a boat so that she can go to the other 6 islands and warn them that Snorlax was coming so that they could try and pick all their fruit and hide it away before it came. Ash and the gang, on the other hand, try a more hands-on approach as they hop on Lapras to follow Snorlax so that they could potentially stop it in person. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was on the second Grapefruit Island, the one that Snorlax was heading towards, and they themselves were trying to harvest the grapefruit, with the intention of taking it back to their Magikarp sub and taking them back to the mainland to sell them for lots of money, as they were obviously very high in demand. Meowth tried to eat one for himself, but he couldn't even peel it with his fucking claws. That shows how thick the skin was then. James suggests that Meowth probably didn't want to eat it anyway, as he should be eating it in its better form, which is candied grapefruit peels. Meowth ignores James and just decides to go with their original plan of bringing all of the grapefruit to the Magikarp sub, as he can't figure out how to fucking eat one. But I mean, if he couldn't open it, how the fuck are humans supposed to open it? We don't have claws. But anyways, they proceed to load the grapefruit into their Magikarp sub, but before they can get that much in, Snorlax arrives on shore. It begins to eat all of the grapefruit that they've gathered, much to Team Rocket's dismay, and they then get even more pissed off as Ash and the gang show up, instructing Team Rocket to either go away and quit their bullshit, or help them stop the Snorlax. Jesse and James want to attack as usual, but Meowth counters that if they stop the Snorlax, then they could try and steal it, and they could try and steal Pikachu in the process. This leads Jesse and James to agree to help out, although both groups decide to really try on their own as opposed to working together. Meanwhile, Ruby had set up a central headquarters where people from all 7 of the Grapefruit Islands could meet up to discuss the situation with Snorlax. This headquarters was a warehouse, so it could also double as a hiding spot for all the grapefruit. Anyways, Ruby was making sure to stay in contact with some people on each island, and she had just been informed that the Snorlax had made its way through the second island, and was about 10% through the entire island's grapefruit. Back with Ash and the gang, they had reached the second island, and were trying their best to stop Snorlax. Ash tried to send out his Squirtle and have it use Skull Bash to attack the Snorlax, but Squirtle just ended up getting body slammed just like Bulbasaur did, as its little head was not big enough for Snorlax's fat ass. Misty then sends out her Staryu, but it's not able to do anything either, as Snorlax just uses Headbutt, and its fat ass head manages to knock it out. Misty then tries her Goldeen, but the Snorlax was obviously still hungry even after eating all that grapefruit, as it just tried to eat Goldeen. Thankfully, Misty was able to recall it before it got eaten, but damn. Misty then tried one more of her Pokemon, being Togepi, but Togepi did absolutely nothing. It just stayed in her arms. And I don't blame it. Why would you even bother sending out Togepi? That's just a setup for failure, especially against a Snorlax. Snorlax then leaves and makes its way to even more grapefruit trees, this time by where Team Rocket was currently standing, so Team Rocket try and stop it. Jessie sends out her Arbok, but it gets body slammed. So Jessie then sends out her Lickitung, but it only gets used as a napkin after Snorlax eats more of the grapefruit, being dragged across Snorlax's mouth. James then sends out his Victory Bell, but obviously the Victory Bell does absolutely nothing aside from eat James. Hey, maybe he would get along with the Snorlax, they both like eating. But I guess not, as the Snorlax then comes up to it and uses Body Slam on it. Team Rocket was completely decimated, aside from James's wheezing, but he decided not to use it for some reason. As James gets free from Victory Bell, Snorlax wanders off again, and the next people to find it are once again Ash and the gang. Misty sends out her Psyduck, yes, that's right, actually on purpose this time, but Psyduck proves to be absolutely useless, as it doesn't even try to battle the Snorlax, instead just picking up a lone grapefruit that Snorlax had dropped while it was fucking eating the rest of them, and Psyduck tries to eat it as well. However, he chokes on its size, much to Misty's annoyance. Ash then decides to send out his Pikachu and have him use Thunderbolt, but it does absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, Ruby was talking to a representative from the second island over the phone, and they informed her that Snorlax had eaten about 50% of the second island's grapefruit at that point. A man then walked up to Ruby and was like, yo, maybe instead of just hearing about updates on the phone, actually do something and come out and help us guard the warehouse or something. And she's like, alright. Back with Ash and the gang, they had now encountered Team Rocket, and they both informed each other that neither of their methods had worked. As they all complained about this, Snorlax came up once again, and James got a new idea. He gets into a costume and proceeds to wave a pendulum in front of the Snorlax's face in an attempt to put it to sleep due to the pendulum essentially hypnotizing it. However, he stares at the pendulum while he's doing it to Snorlax, and this just results in him falling asleep, much to Meowth's annoyance. Despite James's failure, Ash and the gang still believe that his initial concept of trying to make the Snorlax fall asleep was going to be their best bet, so they try to massage the Snorlax to attempt to relax it so much so it would fall asleep, but this does nothing. Man, you know, it's so funny. Snorlax was so hard to wake up, and now it's so hard to put to sleep. Misty then suggests that they have the Snorlax count Snorlaxes as opposed to sheep, but since the Snorlax obviously can't speak, this means that Misty has to count the Snorlax for him, which ends up just putting her to sleep as she counts to 102. She eventually wakes up when Psyduck comes up and wakes her though, which pisses her off. Jessie then gets the idea to dress up as Snorlax's mother and try to convince it to fall asleep with a lullaby, which James and Meowth sing. Maybe she should have fucking sang it because she's the mother, but this doesn't work. Because James and Meowth are such bad singers that it angers Snorlax, and he kicks them into oblivion with Mega Kick, sending them blasting off. After hearing Meowth and James's terrible singing, though, it gives Ash and the gang the idea to try and find Jigglypuff so it could sing Snorlax to sleep. As if there was anyone that could sing Snorlax to sleep, it was Jigglypuff. Unbeknownst to Ash and the gang, Jigglypuff had followed them to the Grapefruit Islands and had paid a visit to the warehouse, putting to sleep all the men who worked there. So, when Ruby arrived at the warehouse, wanting to actually do something like that one worker had suggested, she found them all asleep. Coincidentally, in Ash and the gang's search for Jigglypuff, they had decided to go back to the warehouse so that they could inform Ruby of what was going on, and this led them to also discover all of the men sleeping, with scribbles on their faces, which made them absolutely sure that it was caused by Jigglypuff, meaning that Jigglypuff was nearby. Just then, Ruby got a call that was informing her that Snorlax had now completely decimated the second island and was making its way to the third. This led Ash and the gang to really panic, knowing that they had to find Jigglypuff as soon as possible. So, they decided that instead of finding Jigglypuff, it would be faster to lure it to them, and they did so by making a stage, designing it nice and flashy, with a huge sign indicating that the stage was meant for Jigglypuff. Now, all they could do was wait with the stage on the third island, admiring it until Jigglypuff would arrive. Unfortunately, before Jigglypuff could arrive, Snorlax arrived. It was ready to begin eating at the third island, which was also the island that contained the warehouse where everything was stockpiled. Great. This causes Ruby to worry immensely, worried that all of the island's work would now go to waste. But, thankfully, Ash gets the idea to clap and chant to lure Jigglypuff to them, as since Jigglypuff loved singing so much, maybe it would be attracted by hearing someone else sing for it. So they proceed to chant a Jigglypuff cry, and sure enough, this causes the Jigglypuff to show up just in time, going up to the stage and singing, wasting no time whatsoever. As everyone else falls asleep, aside from Ash and the Snorlax, Ash is able to continue to resist the Jigglypuff singing somehow, likely out of fucking pure will or pure hatred for the Snorlax, or he just covered his ears, who knows. But the point is, he was still awake and went to challenge the Snorlax. He has Pikachu use a Thunder on it as the Snorlax falls asleep to Jigglypuff's song, allowing him to throw a Pokeball and catch it, permanently putting a stop to its eating rampage. However, just as Ash sees it go into the Pokeball, he's no longer able to resist Jigglypuff's singing, as even his ears being plugged wasn't enough, and he falls asleep. Even Pikachu falls asleep as well. Jigglypuff sees that everyone, including Ash, had fallen asleep to its song, and it pisses it off as usual as it proceeds to draw it on everyone's faces with its marker. However, it doesn't just use the marker this time. It also uses a whole bunch of crayons that Ash and the gang used when they designed the sign. The Jigglypuff then takes its exit, and Ash and the gang eventually wake up. Man, how much longer is Jigglypuff just going to keep appearing, putting people to sleep, and then wandering off? Like, when do they end this plot point? Because it doesn't go beyond the original series, I know that. With the Snorlax now caught, everything was now back to normal, and Ruby was so grateful for Ash and the gang's assistance that she decided to give them some candied grapefruit peels. James was right. They did turn their grapefruit into grapefruit peels after all. Also, Ruby definitely must have been really grateful, as the islands have just lost, like, what, a total of half of their total grapefruits by this point, and she was still willing to give some away, even though she beat Ash with a stick for only stealing one. Like, damn. Just then, as Ash and the gang proceed to feed some of the candied grapefruit peels to Pikachu and Togepi, a man walks up to inform Ruby that new saplings of grapefruit trees had started growing on all the islands that were decimated. I guess we had to have one Deus Ex Machina moment this episode, huh? Like, seriously, why were they just randomly growing now? Anyways, this leads Misty to comment on how, although the Snorlax situation was bad, it at least led to something good in the long run. But I don't know about that one, because now they just have to wait for all the grapefruit trees to grow all over again, as opposed to just, having the grapefruit from the get-go. But anyways, who cares? The episode then ends, as usual, with Ash and the gang saying goodbye to Ruby and all the men on the island, as they leave for the next island. Yay!